One of the most important lessons I always teach my students is the idea that experimentation is key and the idea that you have to fail to grow. I'm a huge believer in failing. I believe that it's through failure that you'll learn new things about your art and where your art really wants to take you. So, for instance, years ago, back in the early 2000s, I was really interested in the idea of printing on handmade papers. Digital photography was just really starting to happen, and I was looking at the inkjet papers that were on the market. I wasn't that excited, but I went to my local art store and I saw all these amazing, beautiful handmade papers. You know, stuff made by Arsh, stuff made from Bhutan, Nepal, South America, Japan, all these different wonderful materials and traditions. And I said, I want to print on that. That to me was the promise of digital printing, was that I wasn't going to be limited to the handful of papers that the manufacturers made, but that I could print on anything. And I spent the better part of a year really discovering through trial and error, through failure, to be able to print on handmade papers, changing the way the dots print, changing ink durations, all sorts of stuff that would allow me to make a print on a handmade paper that would rival the papers that were being made by the inkjet manufacturers, that could have beautiful, huge, expressive color gamuts, that could have really good blacks, and at the same time had a soul. So many of the inkjet papers that were made then and that are made now kind of are boring and kind of generic. And I really wanted something that was more than that. I wanted more than that for my work. Now, it was through this process of experimentation and failure that I said, you know what, I can add this to all other parts of my work. So I started tinkering and destroying and modifying lots of different cameras that I work with. I've had dozens of custom cameras made for me, lenses modified. I've glued stuff together that was never meant to be together. Yet it's through that process that I've been able to take my photography to where I wanted to go and not be held by what the industry was giving me. I don't want a camera engineer defining what my camera can and cannot do. So I'm always looking for cameras that I can break, that I can modify for my work. So to that end, this is my newest camera. This is a Voigtlander Enos 2 from 1935. This particular model shoots basically a 6x11 centimeter. Think about that. Panoramic camera in this little tiny format, just absolutely amazing. And it has a Hellar lens, which is an absolutely beautifully designed lens. The only problem, this camera used 1/16 film, which is 70 mils, absolutely amazing. Current 120 film is only 60 mils. And if you look at the size difference, it's a big issue. So how am I gonna get this in this size camera? Well, some brilliant people with 3D printers realized that all you had to do was print a little tiny M tab that could fit into the 120 spool to take up that gap, and now you can use 120 film in 6/16 and 1/16 cameras. Absolutely amazing. But there's potentially an additional problem. When I open the camera up, you can see I've got the spool loaded here, but my gate here, the film gate, is absolutely huge. And on previous cameras that I've had like this, cameras made by Zeiss and stuff like that, it was a real issue. The film would sort of fall inside of the gate. And what I would do to solve that problem is add a small rail to both sides so the film would be held. In this particular camera, because of the way the film is tensioned, it's not an issue. And what's really neat is I get the entire width of a 120 piece of film. So it literally goes edge to edge, is fully exposed. Now, I didn't know that that was going to be the case. So it was through experimentation, testing a couple of rolls of film. I actually put 2 gates in here and tried it. And then I compared it to negatives where I hadn't done it. And I actually liked it better where it didn't have those sort of rails to sort of narrow the gate. So once again, experimentation. I was fully prepared to have to add the rails. I'm glad that I didn't. Additionally, on this camera, I knew a big thing was going to be I was going to need an ND filter. Because I do so much long handheld exposures in the daytime, I usually need an ND filter or a variable ND filter to sort of pull down the light. Like right now here in Vermont, it's so bright that it would be a real issue making the kind of work that I want to make with this camera. So I went on eBay and I bought like 4 filters that I thought would fit on this camera. None of them worked. Absolutely all of them were either too small or too sloppy of a fit to fit on the front of this lens. And as you can imagine, from a camera from 1935, it's difficult to get the accurate information of, what product you should be looking for. So then I got mad and I said, I think I have a Polaroid 195 ND filter sitting out in the studio. and it looks like, at least from my memory, that it would be close. So I went out to the studio and I found my 195, and it didn't quite fit over the front element. It was a little tight and there was no way to get it on there comfortably. So what I did is I pulled the filter apart. I got some 220 sandpaper, and I took out the O-ring and I just ran around it a whole bunch of times. And what happened was that I was able to thin out that O-ring just 10 thousandths of an inch, a tiny little bit. And then it pushed on absolutely perfect. I can take it off without problem, I can put it back on, and the profile is unbelievably small. What's wonderful about that, and what was a surprise, is that when I close the camera up, I can leave the filter on. I was really dreading having to take the filter on or off every single time, but because it's so low, when I go to close the camera down, it absolutely fits, and it can stay locked down there. This is a huge thing for me. It just makes my work so much faster. So I like to work backwards in my process. Why am I working with this camera? Because I'm really infatuated with vertical panoramics. Yet I don't want to carry a big 617 or 624 or 612 camera around. I wanted something small like this that I could put in my pocket. So I'm starting with, I want a certain look on a wall. I also knew that I wanted a certain resolution from the file, which meant that I was most likely going to be working with 120 film. And so I'm working my way backwards through my process. A lot of this is from failure. A lot of this is from years of failing through the different processes and knowing what I would need to go forward. So don't be afraid to fail. Failure is one of the best ways to learn as an artist. And remember, experimentation is always key.